Okay. Good morning, class. We begin with the new chapter we had started, The Hitchhiker, and we'll continue where we talked about a man, the narrator, who had a BMW of light blue color, and how he took one person to carry along on his journey to London. Now, the hitchhiker is a person who takes lift. There was one man, he was a rat-faced man. Why? Because the narrator has described him to be a huge rat kind of a person. That means very skinny and potty, very sharp eyed, with squeaky face and pointed ear. All these features have been told. Okay, so now the story is at a point where the hitchhiker wants to see the speed of the car, and they have an argument regarding the speed. One of them called it that it could not take up to 129 miles an hour, whereas the narrator was sure that it would. So he just felt like demonstrating it to him. Okay. Now 120, my passenger shouted, jumping up and down. Go on, go on. So now the speed was accelerated to a speed of 120. Okay, and now seeing that, the hitchhiker was so overexcited that he just shouted and jumped on his seat and said, kept to move on, keep going. And at that moment, I heard the scream of a police siren. It was so loud that it seemed to be right inside the car. And then a policeman on a motorcycle loomed up alongside us on the inside lane and went past us and raised a hand for us to stop. Now, while they were speeding, the narrator could hear a siren, and that siren was so loud that it appeared to him as if it was making noise inside the car only. So when he looked up, he found that there was a policeman on a motorcycle who had followed them and had moved ahead of them and had given a signal with his hand to stop the car. Finally, he pulled into the side of the road and I pulled behind him. So the motorbike was pulled aside and so was the car. It stopped. Okay, the policeman got off his motorcycle. Then he took off his gloves and placed them on the seat. He was in no hurry now. So now, after keeping the vehicle aside, he got off, he took off his gloves. It is the motorcycle person, the policeman, and he was in no hurry. That means he was all set to ask them why were they speeding. This is a real trouble, I said. I don't like it one bit. So now the narrator says that he did not like all this and it is going to be a big trouble for them now. Don't talk to him any more than necessary. You understand? My companion said. So now the hitchhiker said, you don't talk to him unnecessarily, don't give him a lot of details, just answer to the point. Like an executioner approaching his victim, the policeman came strolling slowly towards us. He was a big man with a belly. His goggles were pulled up on the helmet, showing a smoldering white face with red cheeks. So now this policeman, he approached towards them as if they were the prisoners to be executed, to be punished. And he came very strolling slowly towards them. He was a huge man with a fat belly, protruding belly, and he wore goggles which were pulled up on the helmet. And when the helmet, and from the helmet, his white face, which had red cheeks, could be seen. He sat there like guilty schoolboys waiting for him to arrive. So now both the narrator and the hitchhiker, they both sat as if they had made a mistake and were guilty about it and waited for him. Watch out for this man, my passenger whispered. He looks mean as a devil. So now the hitchhiker again told the narrator that be careful about this man. He looks like a devil. The policeman came round to my open window and placed one meaty hand on the sill. What's the hurry? He said. So now the policeman came. He kept his hand with all its flesh coming out from it. That means he was fat and bulky. On the sill, that means the border of the car, he kept his hand and he asked, "What was the reason for your speeding up the car?" "No hurry, officer," I answered. "In that case," he said, "you've got yourself into a nasty mess, haven't you? Do you know what the speed limit is in this country?" So now he's saying, if you were not in hurry, then what made you speed up so much? Don't you know the speed limit of the country? So to this, the narrator answered, 70, I said. "And do you mind telling me exactly what speed you were doing just now?" I didn't say anything. When he spoke next, he raised his voice so loud that I jumped. 120 miles per hour, he barked. "That's 50 miles an hour over the limit." So now the policeman asked him, "What was the speeding limits that you were following? You crossed 70 long time back, so do you know your speed?" To this, the narrator did not answer because he was guilty. So then again, this policeman gave a big, huge shout, and that made the narrator feel scared and he jumped listening. He was scared and he shouted it was 120 miles. To this, the policeman repeated again, "Okay, so you were 50 miles more than the normal speed, which is 70, which is allowed, which is permissible in this country." Okay, next. Then he started hard at my passenger. Then he stared hard at my passenger. "And who are you?" he asked sharply. "He's a hitchhiker," I said. "I'm giving him a lift." "I didn't ask you," he said. "I asked him." "Oh, I've done something wrong?" my passenger asked. His voice was as soft and oily as hair cream. So now the policeman inquired about the other person in the car. He said, "Who is he?" So to this, the narrator answered, "He's a hitchhiker. That means he's been given a lift by me." So he said, "Did I ask you?" "I asked him." To that, the hitchhiker replied, "Have I done anything wrong?" And he was so soft and polite as if it was a oily hair cream. Okay, "That's more than likely," the policeman answered. "Anyway, you are a witness. I'll deal with you in a minute. Driving license?" he snapped, holding out his hand. So now he was more than likely polite, and to this the policeman said, "Okay, I knew it. Anyway, I will come to you because you are a witness to this speeding car, and I will come to you in a minute." And then he asked the narrator to show his driving license, and he placed forward his hand to hold the driving license. I gave him my driving license. He brought out the dreaded book of tickets. Carefully, he copied the name and address from my license. He filled in the date, the time, and the details of my offense. Then he gave it back to me. So now, once the driving license was handed over to the police, he took out his book of tickets where the penalty is to be taken, and he very carefully copied there the name and the license number and address, etc., filled in the date, time, etc., and he then gave it back to the narrator. "Now you," he said to my passenger, and he walked around to the other side of the car. "Name?" he snapped. "Michael Fish," my passenger said. "What's your job?" he asked sharply. "I'm an odd carrier." "A what?" "An odd carrier." "Spell it." HODCA, odd carrier. "I'll do. That'll do." "And what's a odd carrier, may I ask?" An odd carrier officer is the person who carries the cement up the ladder to the bricklayer. And then the odd is what he carries it in. It's got a long handle, and on top you've got two bits of wood set at an angle. So now the officer, the policeman, he asked about the passenger who was next to the narrator and asked about his name, to which he replied it was Michael Fish. Then he asked about the job he did. To this he replied he was an odd carrier, which was spelled as HODCA, Otka, or maybe it is called odd, with CA being silent. So whatever. So then the officer said, "Okay, that's okay, but what is it? So may I ask what is that hot carrier is?" To this, the person replied that the person who carries the cement up to the ladder for the bricklayer to make the building. So then he asked, then he also described what an hod is. All right. Who's your employer? Now he's asking about the person under whom the hitchhiker was working. I don't have one. I'm unemployed. The cop wrote all this down in the black notebook. Then he returned the book to its pocket and did up the button. When I get back to the station, I'm going to do a little checking up on you, he said to my passenger. Me? What have I done? What have I done wrong? The rat-faced man asked. I don't like your face, that's all, the cop said. And we just might have a picture of it somewhere in our file. He strolled around the car and returned to my window. So now, after taking the details of the hitchhiker, he showed his dislike towards the hitchhiker's face, and he told him that, okay, once I return back to my office, to my center, I would cross check about you. So again, he asked, sorry, I'm sorry. Again, the narrator, sorry, again, the hitchhiker asked, what have I done? Have I done anything wrong? To this, he said, no, I don't like your face, and that's the reason why I'm going to check up my files. Maybe there are some records I could find about you. Maybe you are a criminal, maybe you are a police record. And then with that note, he strolled down towards the other side of the car and towards the narrator's window. I suppose you know you are in serious trouble, he said to me. Yes, officer. You won't be driving this fancy car of yours again for a very long time. Not after we have finished with you. I hope they lock you up for a spell into the bargain. So now the officer is talking and he says, I hope you understand. And he talks to the narrator and tells him, I hope you understand that you're in big trouble. And there could be a chance that you might not be able to drive this car for a pretty long time now because you'll be locked up for the speeding. Now, unless and until you make a bargain, unless and until you tell us some reason or maybe fix up a bargain. You mean prison? I asked, alarmed. So now the narrator was really alarmed. He did not like the idea because he would be in a prison. Absolutely, he said, smacking his lips, along with all the criminals who break the law, and a hefty fine into the bargain. I'll see you in the court, both of you. You will be getting summons to appear. So now the policeman said, okay, see, of course you could be in the prison along with the others who break the laws, and then along with it you could be fined heavily. With a heavy fine you could be charged, and he also assured both the narrator and the hitchhiker that he will see them in the court and they will be sending a summons to appear there in the court. He turned away and walked over to his motorcycle and rode out of sight. Phew, I gasped. That's done it. That's done it. We was caught, my passenger said. We was caught good and proper. So now they are talking that, oh my God, thank God he left. The moment the policeman left, they were relieved a little and they thank God it is done now. So the passenger said, okay, we are caught and we are caught quite heftily. अच्छे से पकड़े गए. We are good and proper. I was caught, you mean? That's right, he said. What are you going to do now? I'm going straight up to London to talk to my solicitor, I said. Solicitor, I said. I started the car and drove on. So now the narrator said, then the hitchhiker asked, what are you going to do next? He said, I will reach London and then I'll talk to my prosecutor or the lawyer. I'll consult a lawyer. And then they started off. You mustn't believe that he said to you about going to prison, my passenger said. I felt tremendously relieved. Now, he's saying that you don't believe that policeman. He won't put you in prison. By the way, I said, you told him you were an unemployed hot carrier, but you told me you were in a highly skilled trade. So I am, he said. but it don't pay to tell everything to a copper. So what do you do? I asked him. Ah, he said shyly, I'm in a very peculiar trade. I'm in the queerest trade. I waited for him to go on. He sat back and smiled. I've got fantastic fingers, he said, holding up both his hands. I glanced at his fingers. They were so beautifully shaped, so slim and long and elegant. They didn't seem to belong to the rest of him at all. They looked more like the fingers of a brain surgeon or a watchmaker. So now, once the policeman left, they were talking among by themselves, and then the narrator said, "Listen, you told me that you were working in a high trade, a very skilled trade you were into, and right now you told him that you were a odd carrier." So to this, the hitchhiker said, "Yeah, I am in a skilled trade, but I did not feel like telling it everything to the copper." Now, copper is the police officer, cop, the cop. Okay, so he said, that's why I did not want to tell him every peculiar thing about it. Okay. Then he said he is in a very special kind of a trading, and he showed his fantastic fingers. Now, once he showed his hands, they were very meticulous and very well shaped and beautiful, slim and elegant, as if they were the hands of a surgeon, brain surgeon, or a watchmaker, which need very precision. These jobs for a brain surgeon and for match a watchmaker, all these works need a skilled hand to work upon. So the hands were just the same, looking very skilled and proper, and it appeared as if the whole other part of the body did not match with the hand. That means the ratty faced man had hands which were really elegant and nicely shapely made. Suddenly my passenger was holding up a black leather belt in his hand. Ever seen this before? He asked. The belt had a brass buckle of an unusual design. So now he took out his, suddenly held a black leather belt and asked, "Have you seen like this before?" And that belt had a brass buckle of an unusual design. "Hey," I said, "that's mine, isn't it? It's mine. Where did you get it?" He grinned and waved the belt gently from side to side. "Off the top of your trousers, of course," he said. "You mean you took it off while we've been driving along?" I asked, flabbergasted. He nodded, watching me all the time with those ratty eyes. So now he said, "Where did you get this belt? It's mine. When did you take it?" So he just moved off the belt from one side to another from his hand, and he said he took it out from his top of the trousers. So he asked, "When did you do it? While we were driving?" He said, "Yes." And he was flabbergasted. That means he was in a state of shock. The narrator was in a state of shock. He nodded, watching me all the time with those ratty eyes, and he kept nodding and watching. Then he said, yes, he had done that. He dropped the belt on his lap, and now all at once there was a brown shoelace dangling from his fingers. "And what about this then?" he exclaimed, waving the shoelace. I glanced down at my shoe. The lace of one of them was missing. "Good grief," I said. "How did you do that? You've got fantastic fingers." "Exactly right," he cried. He sat back and smiled. He knew he had greatly impressed me with those two tricks, and this made me very happy. "I don't want to be late," he said. "What time is it?" I hitched up my sleeve to look at the watch on my wrist. It wasn't there. I looked at the man. He looked back at me, grinned. "You've taken that too?" I said. He held out his hand, and there was my watch lying in his palm. He placed the watch carefully on the leather tray in front of him. "I wouldn't nick anything from you," he said. "You are my pal. You are giving me a lift." "I'm glad to hear it," I said. "All I'm doing is answering your questions," he went on. "You asked me what I did for a living, and I'm showing you. What else have you got of mine?" So now these passengers, while they were moving and chit-chatting, first he showed the leather belt, then he took off the shoelace, and after that, he was when he was flabbergasted, he was shocked, and he knew that okay, he's the one who has picked it up. So then he said, "Hey, what time is it? Because I have to reach London quickly." And when he look for his watch. He couldn't find. So the narrator very questionably asked, "Did you take it?" To this, the hitchhiker said, "Yes, of course," and he took it out and kept it on his palm. And then it was at that time he said, "It was you were asking me what business I am, so here I am. I'm showing you all the proofs in which business I am." So can you guess what he was doing? He was a